your belief in Ram, your belief in our ancient traditions are being attacked. Okay, that's like the what's happening in the West around the term cultural Marxism.
रामलाला खतरे में है, रामलाला
खतरे
खतरे
में
में है।
है, एग्जैक्टली। जो आपके जो इतिहास है, जो आपके रिवाज है, वो सब खतरा में है। मतलब this is the same as the cultural Marxism argument with the panchayat decentralization, enormous policy changes, but the culture of the countryside wasn't transformed. I remember sitting with Anil Biswas in the 1990s, interviewing him for 5 days. This was Anil's big thought. He said, if we don't change the culture in the countryside, all these gains will be reversed. The people who follow the BJP are being eaten alive
Exactly,
because there is no happiness in the
exactly,
BJP project. Okay, let's be frank. There's no joy. इसमें आनंद नहीं है.
exactly.
What's the joy when you go and listen to Modi speaking? उसमें काफी क्रोध है, आनंद नहीं है. There's iron, and
এই কবি বলেছিলেন প্যালেস্টাইনের, কবিতা হলো আমাদের হৃদয়ের রক্ত, চোখের পানি, রুটির নুন। রুটি, কবিতা, জীবন, মার্ক্সবাদ এবং রাজনীতি নিয়ে বারবার যে ব্যক্তিত্ব সরব হন, সেই অসাধারণ তাত্ত্বিক, লেখক এবং জীবন শিল্পী এবং সমাজতাত্ত্বিক বিজয় প্রসাদকে আমরা আজকে কথা মুখে পেয়েছি। আপনাকে প্রথমেই স্বাগতম।
নমস্কার।
হ্যাঁ, কেমন শীত পড়েছে দিল্লিতে?
I'm not in Delhi, but I was, of course, for many years in Delhi, and my Bengali was great until I was 9 years old, and then Bangla completely disappeared from my life.
Okay, okay. My English is completely, not completely, somehow disappeared. Okay, আমি একটা যে প্রশ্নে আজকে প্রথম যাব, কয়েকদিন আগে মোহন ভাগবত তার একটা বক্তব্যে বললেন যে কালচারাল মার্ক্সিজম হচ্ছে দেশের সামনে সবচেয়ে বড় বিপদ। আবার আমরা দেখলাম কিছু হিন্দি ছবিতে বলা হচ্ছে এ নয়া হিন্দুস্তান হয় ঘর মে ঘুসকে মারেঙ্গে। তাহলে আজকে আরএসএস বিজেপির ন্যারেটিভটা আমাদের কোন জায়গায় নিয়ে যাচ্ছে? কলকাতাতেও দেখছি যে লক্ষ কণ্ঠে গীতা পাঠের বিষয়টা। তাহলে আরএসএস বিজেপির এই ন্যারেটিভটা নিয়ে যদি একটু আলোকপাত করেন।
I mean, let's back up a little bit. For my entire youth, from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, there was a strong narrative in India, strong cultural consensus, let's say, around the ideas that came out of the nationalist movement, ideas of some social welfare, ideas of the notion of secular citizen. I spent the first 9 years of my life in Bengal, for instance. Even before the left front came to power in 1977, Bengal had a very strong tradition coming out of the food movement, coming out of Tebaga and so on, of an idea that, despite the fact that there had been an ugly history before, Hindu-Muslim riots in the 1940s, the partition of Bengal, Greater Bengal into Bangladesh later, and so on, that there was something inherently good about being kind to others, open to other traditions, and so on. I remember there's a place this meme comes on social media all the time. In Calcutta, in Newmarket, there is a Jewish-owned bakery called Nahum's, which has Muslim bakers and mainly a Hindu clientele during Christmas. This is the world of my youth. Complications of culture, kindness to other people. It's a main thing. Well, in the 1980s, when social welfare started to die in India, when the state began to withdraw from providing social welfare. Okay, when the state said we are no longer going to take care of people's basic needs, we are not going to provide subsidies for agriculturalists, rural credit schemes. We are not going to provide um, various forms of incentive for people to build low income housing. For instance, although India does very badly on housing, but still, when all of that began to die, the Congress found that their mass agenda was disappearing. How can you go to the people, okay, and give a speech and say, vote for us, we're going to take away everything from you? Austerity and democracy are a contradiction. How can you go to the people and
Yes, that
say, we're going to take it away? And so at the time in the 1980s, this new consensus started to come that we should talk about religion in public life, or we should talk about identities that are narrower. The problem of Bangladeshi migrants. You may remember this in the 1990s in Delhi, 1980s actually, and 90s, the BJP in Delhi, which was a minor force, an irrelevant force, began to bang the table and say, "वो Bangladeshi वहां रहते हैं. We have to go after the Bangladeshis. उसको निकालो. ये
मीनाक्षीपुरमेর
इनका देश नहीं है." You know,
দলিতরা
and
ভীষণভাবে হিন্দুত্বের ফোল্ডারে চলে এলো মীনাক্ষীপুরমের ঘটনা।
exactly. Okay. But it was, you see how interesting it is. They went to the people and they gave a politics which had a mass line. Now, it's not the mass line of saying we'll solve your food problem, roti, kapra, or makan. But this is no less a mass line. And those on the left should never misunderstand this, that the BJP and the Congress drove a mass line which brought religion, anti-immigrant, Bangladeshis, Atankwadi, the relationship between the migrant and the terrorist, the Atankwadi. I mean, that term, it was all over public debate in the 1980s, whether it's Khalistanis or Kashmiris or Bangladeshis. It was all a mix. So the BJP authentically started driving a mass line saying, your belief in Ram, your belief in our ancient traditions are being attacked. Okay, that's like what's happening in the West around the term cultural Marxism.
रामलाला खतरे में है, रामलाला
खतरे
खतरे
में
में है।
है, एग्जैक्टली। जो आपके जो इतिहास है, जो आपके रिवाज है, वो सब खतरा में है। मतलब this is the same as the cultural Marxism argument in Europe and the United States. Matlab, what they are saying is, these left wingers, they are attacking your culture, your tradition. Now, nobody was attacking the tradition.
Exactly.
Nobody. I mean, let's go to Bengal. Was the left front government attacking the traditions of anybody? No, not at all. The pujos were continuing right through the 34 years of the left front government. In fact,
পুজোর সংখ্যাও বেড়েছিল হই হই করে।
Exactly. Sometimes we used to say, "Arey, we are doing too much with the pujos. Let that be in society. Politics should be separate from that." But no, in paras across Calcutta, for instance, the SFI youth would build their own pandal. Okay. I mean, how were we attacking tradition? We were part of the tradition. हम उसमें ही थे, बाहर से तो हम नहीं आए, हम उसमें ही थे।
এখানে একটা জায়গায় আসি। আপনার নিশ্চয়ই মনে আছে 1991 সালে 1989 লেফটরা যখন রাজীব গান্ধীকে হারিয়ে পাওয়ারে এলো, তখন দুটো বিষয় খুব প্রবলভাবে উঠে এলো, মানে ওই সামাজিক লাইনের জায়গা থেকে। একটা হচ্ছে মন্ডলের বিষয়, আর একটা হচ্ছে কাজের অধিকারকে সাংবিধানিক অধিকারের বিষয়। এবং রাষ্ট্রীয় মোর্চা সরকার সেই সরকার যেখানে ভিপি সিং প্রথমে এসে শিল্পপতিদের সাথে নয়, ট্রেড ইউনিয়ন নেতাদের সাথে কথা বললেন যে দেশের পরিবর্তন তারা কি ভাবছে, কিভাবে দেশটা চলবে। তাহলে লেফটরাও তো 90 সাল অব্দি একটা মাস লাইন টেনেছে। তাহলে লেফটদের মাস লাইনটা জনপ্রিয় হলো না কেন? এটা কি বামফ্রন্টের পরাজয় বা ইত্যাদি কারণে হলো না, যে একদিকে লেফটরা মাস লাইন টানছে, অন্যদিকে বামফ্রন্টের বিরুদ্ধে নানা অভিযোগ মানবাধিকার ভঙ্গের হচ্ছে, বা সেই অর্থে সে নতুন কোনো আশার আলো দেখাতে পারছে না? যদি একটু
See, Debashish, one thing I want to say very critically of our own tradition. Okay, I'm a communist, but I'm very critical of my own tradition because we have to be critical of our tradition to make it grow. Nahi?
এক্স্যাক্ট
Nahi? We have to be critical. Now, in the 1950s and 60s, intellectuals of the left started to write about various cultural traditions that are important. For instance, the materialist tradition in India, the Lokmatas, the Ajivikas, all those old traditions, D.D. Kosambi, and DPC and others, they were writing about this. Um, Toward the end, when I was in college, one of the great books of this tradition, a last book before he also lost his way, was Namvar Singh's Dusri Parampara Ke Khoj, In Search of a Different Tradition. It's a great book. So, what I'm saying is that we had the opportunity as the left to actually drive a cultural agenda, to talk about what is the culture of the actual Indian people, the peasantry, the working class, the people whose culture was being suffocated by Brahmanism. In other words, you have to have a frontal critique of the caste system. See, our movement was hesitant to enter that domain, to enter the domain of lifting up the people's culture properly and directly attacking Brahmanism. See, we didn't, for all kinds of reasons. And because of that, we were not able to break down in India the actual feudal structures. Let's again come to Bengal in the countryside. The left front government made enormous advances with Operation Bargadar, with the land reforms, with the panchayat decentralization, enormous policy changes. But the culture of the countryside wasn't transformed. I remember sitting with Anil Biswas in the 1990s, interviewing him 4 or 5 days. This was Anil's big thought. He said, if we don't change the culture in the countryside, all these gains will be reversed. And in that sense, he was right. Let me give you an example. In Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and so on, BJP in power. Now, even today in India, there are some social welfare policies tied to elections. So BJP says we're going to give gas cylinders to these people. Nahin? 2 lakh logon ko gas cylinder de denge. Okay, given. Now, the Congress also does that. And in fact, the left government also used to do that. So many gas cylinders. But this is the difference of the BJP. BJP says local party BJP cadre in this mohalla has to go, they get a list. These are the 20 people in this mohalla who got gas cylinder. Make a committee of the recipients of gas cylinders, meet as a committee, and that becomes the mass base, not only for elections, but for cultural transformation. These are poor people who have received something, but the BJP says don't just give them something, make them part of our cultural transformation project. Ye hum nahi kiye the. We would deliver land reform and then disappear.
অনেকগুলো সংগঠন মিলে একসাথে করে, বিএইচপির মন্দির রিকনস্ট্রাকশন আন্দোলন থেকে আদিবাসী বন কল্যাণ সমিতির কাজকর্ম। প্লিজ।
No, this is exactly it. Vanvasi Kalyan Kendra, built by the BJP 1980s, 90s. They'll go into the Adivasi areas. By the way, they don't even say Adivasi, they say Vanvasi. Those who live in forests. Why? Because they don't want to say that the Adivasis are the original. Because that's the
Aryan theory.
Aryan. They don't want to say we came from outside. All of this. They are clever, but they built the mass base by changing the cultural conversation. You see, it's not that they are not doing some element of social welfare. वो भी तो दे देते हैं, cylinder and so on, right? But they change the conversation. Then वो ये देंगे, and then they will say that, look, we are the first to give it to you. It's not true. Then they will say that the Congress only gives it to Muslims, or the Congress only gives it to XYZ, to foreigners. We are giving it to you. And this is the changing of the cultural conversation. And they have succeeded. They have changed the cultural conversation in India. Now the question is, how does the left return to this conversation from a position of weakness? We can't return simply by saying we're going to give you gas cylinders, because
Exactly.
they're already getting the gas cylinder.
Exactly.
You have to have a better story about what it means to be an Indian today.
এক্স্যাক্টলি, এক্স্যাক্টলি। এই জায়গায় একটা প্রশ্ন রয়েছে, খুব সুন্দর একটা জায়গাকে বললেন যে একটা অন্য ন্যারেটিভের। যদি আমরা ভারতবর্ষকে দেখি, ভারতবর্ষের সাংখ্য দর্শনের দেশ। তিনি সাংখ্য কোনোদিন দেবতায় বিশ্বাস করেন, বা মহাভারতে যেটা মার্কস কালমার্কস বলছেন যে শ্রেণী সংগ্রাম, মহাভারতেও আমরা দেখছি যখন ওই জতুগৃহ পুড়ছে, তখন পাণ্ডবরা চলে যাচ্ছে, ৫ জন আদিবাসীকে ওর মধ্যে ঢুকিয়ে দিয়ে চলে যাচ্ছে। অর্থাৎ শাসক শ্রেণীর লড়াই হচ্ছে, পাণ্ডব আর কৌরবের মধ্যে, মারা যাচ্ছে আদিবাসীরা। এর থেকে বড় শ্রেণী সংগ্রাম তো আর কোনো কিছু হতে পারে না। তাহলে আমরা আমাদের ক্লাস রিয়েলিটি গুলোকে তুলে ধরি না কেন? আমাদের কাছে ভারত বলতেই শুধু বিজেপি বোঝায় কেন? এই ব্যর্থতাটা নিয়ে একটু যদি বলেন, কেন এটা হয়?
Yeah, I mean, look, Devashish, it is always, anytime there's a war, whose sons and daughters get killed? Bertolt Brecht, the great writer, asked a simple question: who built the pyramids? Who built the pyramids? Who fought the wars? Not Napoleon. Napoleon didn't fight the war. Napoleon sent other people to fight the war. Generals sit in the back. They send others to die in their name. India today, in a sense, has a similar problem. There are people being eaten alive in India today, financially, metaphysically, culturally. They are being eaten alive. Even the people who follow the BJP are being eaten alive, because there is no happiness in the BJP project. Okay, let's be frank. There's no joy. Isme anand nahi hai. What's the joy when you go and listen to Modi speaking? Usme kafi krodh hai, anand nahi hai. There's iron, and that has a kind of masculine appeal. But
অনেকে বলেন তাদের প্রজেক্টেড রাম অনেকটা ইউরোপীয় সিনেমার হিরোদের মতো দেখতে থাকে, তার সাথে রঘুপতি রাঘব আর রাজা রামের সম্পর্ক খুব কম।
You mentioned Mahabharata. Let's move to the Ramayana for 1 minute, and maybe Ramcharitmanas more than Ramayana. Just 1 minute of leaving the Mahabharata. Okay. In fact, if you go and read both the Mahabharata and the Ramcharitmanas, the leading characters in it, let's take Ram as an example. Ram is a character filled with doubt, filled with compassion, filled with anxiety about what's going on in the world. This is not a character of certainties. He's always doubting. He wants to do something that's good. It's interesting. Even when he returns to Ayodhya and he has a confrontation with Sita, and Sita quite correctly says, well, look, I did the Agni Pariksha, I passed it, but I don't have faith in you, I'm going. And the earth opens. Ram is filled with grief. Ram is a complicated character. But from the 1980s, the BJP portrayed Ram in a way as a macho, unfeeling strongman. I mean, in a sense, Modi is wearing the clothes of the BJP's interpretation of Ram. Tough guy, right? He's in Akhada. He's the Ram that comes out of the Akhada. Tough guy, pushing people aside, doesn't care about anybody, never really displays grief or compassion. But in fact, the historical figure of Ram in the Ramayana, in the Ramcharitmanas, it's not a character of the Akhada. He's a character of the forest. He's a character surrounded by small animals. He doesn't want to kill animals unless he's going to eat them. It's a relation. He's not. He's not driving a bulldozer through the forest. This is not Gautam Adani on a bulldozer. Driving a bulldozer through the forest, unconcerned. Ram is a character of compassion. Now, I'm not saying that we should appropriate Ram and
কিন্তু
communist Ram.
রামায়ণে আছে শম্ভুকের গলা কাটা গেছিল বেদ পড়ার জন্য।
Yeah, so that's interesting. The Ramayana is filled with contradictions, and there are some terrible moments, because in one way, if you take the big picture of the Ramayana is about the colonization of India by the Aryan settlers. That's the historical Ramayana. That's why Ram, when he's traveling around, has to subdue Adivasi communities, Dalits, and so on. There's a lot of violence in the Ramayana. Mustn't underestimate that. I agree. There's a violence against Shambhuk and so on, very much there in the story of the Ramayana. But even the lead character in the Ramayana is more compassionate than the lead political characters in the BJP today. That's the only point. Like Amit Shah could learn a lot about compassion if he actually went back and read the Ramayana. Given that Ram in the Ramayana is still doing something quite terrible to other people, to the so-called Rakshasas and the so-called, people of lesser birth and so on. Ram is pretty ruthless. But even then, Devashish, he's more compassionate than the Modis and Adanis and the Amit Shahs and so on, who don't seem to demonstrate compassion. And so they have been able to, and here's your early point, they have been able to alter the culture in India. And I don't want to say that, it was perfect in the 1970s and 60s. It was not perfect, but there was a different cultural hegemony, where secularism, Indian form of secularism, was dominant.
And the question of compassion in the films of Satyajit Ray and Ritik Ghatak and others, Mrinal Sen and all others.
I mean, you're talking about the top cinema, but even in the more popular mass cinema, even Tollywood's mass cinema, there was much more compassion. You take the case of Bollywood, take the case of Amitabh Bachchan. Forget Bollywood. Take just Amitabh Bachchan. You watch Amitabh Bachchan's early films, Amitabh Bachchan is a hero of the working class.
Exactly.
Amitabh Bachchan is interested in making the world a better place, right? Where even in like Coolie is a great movie for this toward the end of that. But Dawn, all of the movies, it's not just Amitabh, it's all of those heroes were working class heroes. The day laborer, the factory worker who stands up against the boss, against Gulami, and he's standing there and the people are with him and so on, right? That was the culture. And it was secular, it was Amar Akbar Anthony in a way. Now it had its own limitations because they treated religion in a cliched way. Islam was portrayed very cliched, like a topi wala, chewing a pan, singing kawali. Okay, it's a cliche, but still it was a portrait of love and fellowship. The Parsi character was always a character of fun, Baba, or the Baba is coming, with a walking stick. But it was a very unfortunate cliche, but the character was still part of the social fabric. Today's Amitabh films and other films, they are about wealth. Amitabh is now the rich man in the films, right? In almost all the films. And it's not just about wealth, but it's a kind of Hindu fantasy where other people are not that central, in the fabric. They are outside the fabric. There's a lot of puja in the films and so on. I don't mind that. Puja is part of people's lives. It's okay. We don't have a problem with that. But it seems to center what the society is. And those who don't come to the mandir are outside the social fabric. I find that very disturbing. That's part of the cultural loss. We have to contest that. as the left. The left is not just about winning elections. Okay, the left is not just about being in parliament and making arguments. We have to win the culture. We have to win society. You have to be out there in a place like Bengal with such a rich tradition. You named it all, Ghatak to Ray. It's a rich tradition. You have to fight to claim what is really a good Bangla tradition. Certainly the Bangla tradition cannot, the highest point of Bangla tradition cannot be Mamtabanerjee. She cannot be the last stage, in Hegel's terms, the last stage of Bengali civilization. You have to go beyond that. I mean,
আমরা আমরা এখানে একটা খুব সুন্দর জায়গায় আসি। আপনার একটা বক্তব্য খুব সবার কাছেই পৌঁছেছিল। আমার বোন আমায় পাঠিয়েছিল বক্তব্যটা, যেখানে আপনি ওয়াল্টার বেঞ্জামিনের কথা বলেছিলেন, ফ্রাঙ্কফুর্ট স্কুলের, যে পৃথিবীতে সভ্যতার যে স্মারকগুলো আছে, সেই স্মারকগুলো আসলে নির্যাতিতের রক্ত দিয়ে তৈরি বা নির্যাতিতের কান্না দিয়ে তৈরি। মানে নিউ লিবারাল পুঁজিবাদের যুগে নির্যাতনটাকে একটা স্বাভাবিক ঘটনা হয়ে গেছে। ফ্রম স্কুল টু কলেজ, ফ্রম সমস্ত জায়গায় আমরা ট্র্যাজিক নায়ক খুঁজে পাই না। এখন সবাই সবাইকে লুজার বলে দেয়। এটা যদি একটু ব্যাখ্যা করেন, এবং ওয়াল্টার বেঞ্জামিনকে আজকে আপনি কিভাবে খুঁজে পান, সেটাও যদি একটু সংযোজন করেন।
Well, firstly, Walter Benjamin was a visionary and a poet. He was a poet Marxist. The theses on history, on the philosophy of history, very powerful text. And there is that great line about the angel of history, being pushed by the winds that come out of some extraterrestrial place. The wings open and the angel of history looks back and sees the destruction. But actually, that's not the only time in Benjamin's writings that the angel comes. In other writings, the angel is also there. This time, not always looking back, but looking forward, looking to see what's coming ahead. Benjamin was writing in the context of Nazism. It's actually good for people to. I wish there was a good Bangla edition of Benjamin's writings about fascism, because it could be instructive in this moment in India for people to read thinkers like that. There's a reason why our institute is called Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, because the Frankfurt School's actual name is Institute for Social Research. So we took the name from that. Why? Because Frankfurt School was also interested how to understand fascism, in their context. And when we created our institute, we were thinking, today we don't have identical fascism as the 1930s, but we have a tendency to the right. And we need to understand this far right. We need to understand its intimacy, its closeness with liberalism. How liberals don't have a problem with the far right. They have a greater problem with the masses, their intimacy with the far right and so on. So in that sense, I've studied a lot the writings of the Frankfurt School. I don't like a lot of their work. It's not all great. But what Benjamin writes about the context of the cultural, the need to create a new idea of history, that we can't think of history as linear, going in a straight line, always improving. Engels writes about zigzag, sometimes improvement, sometimes reversal.
লেনিন কি কথা বলেছেন, যে বিপ্লব কোনো সরল রেখায় আসবে না, জিগজ্যাগ।
Zigzag. It just cannot go in a straight line, improvement always. So in a way, neoliberal thinking promotes among young people the belief in linearity. You go to school, you study hard, you advance your agenda, you become with a degree, you go out there, get a job. Neoliberalism promotes an agenda which people cannot actually meet. Most people, they finish their degree and they're unemployed. There are millions, hundreds of millions of people in countries like India who did everything they were supposed to do, the linear history. You go to your school, you do your exams, you do your madhyamik or whatever, and then you go to college, right? In college, you study hard, you get your degree, and then what? Then, and it's not new, of course, people have been looking for jobs for years. Remember that Ray film where the guy says, is a job interview, remember? And the guy says something and he talks about the Vietnam War.
Exactly. প্রতিদ্বন্দ্বী।
That was a great scene, it's a great film. Anyway, but increasingly hundreds of millions of people follow the linear map. They can't find a job. They're frustrated, angry. They take their anger out in different ways, And in a sense, we have become a society of angry people, This idea of compassion. It's not just that the BJP is not got compassionate leaders. The structure of society, the actual objective conditions make for a lack of good feeling. People are angry. They're atomized, I'll give you an example, Debashish. When I ride the Delhi metro, there's a line that goes from the center of Delhi to Badarpur. And in the evening, the line going towards Badarpur is filled with day laborers, working class, not necessarily day laborers, but the working class who finished the service work. People who were drivers in homes or they work as dishwashers in restaurants, and they are going back home to Badarpur. On the train, there's hundreds and hundreds of people per carriage with headphone on, looking at the phone. And they are watching some video, they're watching sometimes, whatever it may be, some songs, some memes, the whole way. Because the nature of contemporary capitalism has made the train ride or the bus ride, okay, that's their time of leisure.
Exactly.
They have no leisure time. So we have created an angry society. You get home, and when you get home, it's a small home, it's not big. If your family is there, you have to take care of your children, you have to do the washing, you have to do the clothes, you have to maybe go to the bazaar. There's no leisure time. And then you have to wake up really early in the morning to catch the train or the bus or whatever, or ride your bicycle to your work. Leisure time has come on to commuter time. And this creates a psychological problem, in society. The collective life has been destroyed. Okay, that's what I'm trying
স্লো,
to say.
যেটা মিলেন কুন্দারাও বলেছেন, স্লোনেস মানুষকে ভাবনা উস্কে দেয়। আমি যখন একটা কিছু স্লোর মধ্যে দিয়ে যাই, তখন আমি অনেক বেশি ভাবতে পারি, কিন্তু সবসময় তাড়াহুড়ো করে দৌড়নো আমায় কোনো ভাবনার কাছে পৌঁছতে দেয় না। খুব অসাধারণ জায়গাটা আপনি বলছেন। হ্যাঁ, প্লিজ।
I mean, this is not even about necessarily the experience of time, phenomenology, the experience of time. It's also becomes neurological. It enters your head. There's a feeling of a grip of great anxiety. Everything is rushed, as you say. There's no time to absorb things. If you are in a partnership with a man or a woman, you have no time to really communicate and connect with each other, because the only conversation you have is logistics.
Exactly.
Who's going to take the kid tomorrow? What's the thing? I got that. Everything is reduced, and the kind of higher levels of life disappear. That's what I mean by the loss of the collective life. Even the collective life inside a family. The
Right.
time to have a collectivity. It's gone. I mean, when you go to a park, any city in India, you go to the park, it's largely elderly people walking around. You don't see people in the midlife there, except the rich. People in the midlife. So working class people, age 50, 60, 40, 30, they are busy with social reproduction. Social welfare schemes have died. They're struggling to survive. So they don't have time to go for a walk in the park. And those democratic spaces that were available after independence, the park, the sidewalk. Why do we build sidewalks in cities? It's a great space of democracy. People get
কলকাতায় পাড়া পাড়া পাড়ায়
Para.
মানুষ।
For instance, how many? Let's do a survey. Okay, let's do a survey. Let's take one particular para in Calcutta. Okay, and let's do a survey. Let's ask people, how many of you play carom on the street today? And how many of you used to play carom on the street, or your father and brother did, 50 years ago? I don't know, but I would bet there's a decline of that. And it's not all about the phone. You see, it's not all about the phone and the computer. It's about the nature of the day, of time, of the crushing of everyday life. It's what you said. There's the time issue is a big issue. But if you come back to Walter Benjamin, the angel of history, looking back and seeing destruction, that was a pessimistic account. I don't think the angel of history looks back and sees destruction. I think the angel of history looks back and sees very complicated terrain. We built great things in the past. I'm a great defender of the Soviet Union. The
And
Soviet Union took a backward social world where illiteracy rates were very high, and within 10 years, had a literacy movement that gave people the right in rural areas to build libraries. Nehru goes to the USSR in 1927. He wrote a little book called Soviet Russia, which I think Leftward Books is going to reprint. In Soviet Russia, Nehru writes that, I go to the countryside, he said, and I see these libraries, the Lisbeck libraries. And he says, my God, this reminds me of India, but will we ever be able to do this?
এটা
India,
রবীন্দ্রনাথ
20 years later, 1927, Nehru's in Russia. 20 years later, 47, when the British are thrown out of India, the literacy rate in India was 12%. 12%. So Nehru then 20 years before is thinking, will we in India be able to, let's say in rural Uttar Pradesh, have libraries in every village where people come and they read? I mean, this is the advance of civilization. So when the angel looks back, the angel will also see the great advances in the Soviet Union, the immense advances in Cuba. I mean, the immense advances in Bengal. Can't look, people forget in Bengal that they have no memory of this, but there was the Bengal famine. Let me just give you some dates, okay, Debashish. Bengal famine 1943, whole of Midnapur area, right? That whole area was devastated. Millions of people died. 1946, Tebaga movement, where the peasants were arguing, we want to have 1/3 of the harvest, not 10%, not 5%, 1/3. We'll divide the harvest into three bhags, and we'll take one. 1946. Then, after India was independent, there was great hunger in Bengal. Just talking about Bengal now. So there was the food movement. Jyoti Basu returns from his legal degree and becomes a leader in the food movement in the 1950s. Since the communists came to power, first time 1971, first the communists come to power with the Bangla Congress in an alliance, 1971.
69 first time power
69, sorry, 69. Sorry, 69. The Bangla Congress, right? And then comes with the left front 77 until 2011. The immense achievements of those 34 years have been erased. People don't remember those. That it's because of the left role in Bengal that level of hunger was basically almost entirely eradicated. That is, when we get to the 2000s, okay, the situation in Bengal was not great. And I know in the party and in the left front, there were huge debates. What should be the way forward? Should it be building industry? Is the way forward, let's say the oil refinery, in Nandigram area, is that the way forward? Or should there be more money put into
হরিপুরে আণবিক বিদ্যুৎ কেন্দ্র, ইউরোপে আর আণবিক বিদ্যুৎ কেন্দ্র উৎপন্নই হয় না।
Yeah, the Salim group comes in, all of that stuff. But the other side of the debate then was more money for health, more money for education. That was a debate in the left front. Okay. But still, even in the more difficult period of the 2000s, hunger was not an issue in Bengal. People were hungry. Of course, but it was not a mass hunger. There was no mass starvation. The land reforms helped against that. The Operation Barga helped against that. Decentralization of panchayat rule helped against all that. It's not, so when the angel looks back, when the angel glances back, we should not minimize the immense achievement. between the famine of 43 and the food movement of 51, 52, 53, there were huge advances made by the left, not by Siddhartha Shankar Ray's government. Okay, Shankar Ray's government didn't make those advances. This was the left. And I think we should be proud of that. And in the battle of ideas, in a place like Bengal today, in the battle of ideas, this should not be something we concede to the right wing. We should not concede that, oh, we made, all these mistakes. Of course, we made mistakes. We are human beings, but we made immense advances. And I think sometimes I feel our attitude is we concede too much. We don't defend the left front government strong enough.
এটা এখানে একটা জায়গায় যাবো আমরা, তারপর লেফট ফ্রন্টে আসবো আস্তে আস্তে। অনুষ্ঠানটাকে আজকের মতো শেষ করতে হবে, আগামী দিনে আরো কথা বলবো বলে। উত্তর আধুনিকতা বনাম মার্ক্সবাদের দ্বন্দ্বটাও ভারতবর্ষে একটা জায়গায় এসে গেছে। উত্তর আধুনিকতা বলছে দেয়ার ইজ নো গ্র্যান্ড ন্যারেটিভ। এই যে তৃণমূল সহ যে আঞ্চলিক দলগুলো আছে তাদের সাথে একটা মাত্রায় হয়তো বিজেপির একটা দ্বন্দ্বও আছে সরকার দখল নিয়ে। তাহলে এই আঞ্চলিক পার্টিগুলো কি ভারতবর্ষে দেয়ার ইজ নো গ্র্যান্ড ন্যারেটিভ এর একটা উত্তর আধুনিক রাজনীতিকে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করে?
Well, okay. I mean, firstly, we know the BJP already talked about it, Debashish. BJP has a grand narrative. The BJP grand narrative is that they essentially are trying to make the Indian subject into a Hindu subject. It's very clear. Everybody knows that. And we've seen that, for 40 years or so, they've been driving this point home, when they say, this person is outsider, that person is. It's a classic, right-wing strategy. They narrow what is Indian, and then they build from that and build outwards, so that you can then create a BJP Muslim committee, after you strengthen the inner core, because then you say this is a second, it's not actually Indian, it's a second. Anyway, their thing. Trinamool is interesting. What is the Trinamool grand narrative? In a way, in my opinion, having watched Mamtabanerjee's career for a long time, in a way, the entire Trinamool agenda was anti-left. Its entire grand narrative was anti-left. And the remnants of the bourgeoisie in Bengal, the money in Bengal, was not unhappy with the left, by the way. The left wasn't doing something that was super antithetical to the bourgeoisie, because don't forget, the left was also modernizing agriculture, which sections of the bourgeoisie will find a good thing. It's better to have a dynamic agricultural sector than a dead feudal sector. Okay, so sections of the bourgeoisie weren't totally against the left. They were okay with it, but they, by the 2000s, they didn't want to have the trade unions be a hassle anymore. Okay, the trade unions were strengthened by the left in power. Don't underestimate that. I mean, look, in retrospect, we could have done some interesting things. Okay, we could have gone against the government of India and broken the locks of all those factories along the Hooghly, in whatever that Titagarh, that whole area north of Calcutta. I've driven through there. It's fascinating. This enormous property of that has been held in court cases, which unused productive forces. Maybe the government should have gone and smashed the lock and said, we're going to build housing for the poor, or we're going to build factories. It's prime real estate along the Hooghly. Okay, next to, what is that called? Is it Tarkeshwar? Up there, Tarkeshwar, on the other side of the river, whatever it is, that area north of Calcutta, okay, where Singur is up there, in that area. Yeah. So the left could have done interesting things, to socialize the productive forces there. The big dead factories could have been revitalized. Anyway, we didn't do a lot of things. But Trinamool appeared and said, we are going to give capital free hand. We are going to bring Bengal back. And what they did cleverly was they used a rhetoric to the left of the left front, talking about the rights of the people have not been met, and Muslims' rights have not been met. Mamta Banerjee is a skilled political operative. She used the language to the left of the party and confused a lot of people in Bengal, including important cultural figures. You remember Mahasweta Devi and others. abandon the left for Trinamool, knowing full well that the Trinamool was in the concrete, was knee deep in capital. Its political program was the program of capital, but the language of Mamta Banerjee was the language of the street protester. That confused a lot of people. So she broke a lot of people who should have remained with the left. Okay, at the time. Okay, so what is their grand narrative? Remember, the first narrative was, I'm going to make Kolkata like London. Remember that. We're going to make Kolkata like London. But okay, we on the left laughed at that. Okay, those lights that she had all over the city and so on. But there's something there. Many years ago, I learned that what the middle class needs always, the middle class always needs convenience. Inconvenience is a very big problem for the middle class. Middle class doesn't necessarily want to become a crorepati. Okay, they may want to fantasize about it. They know it's not going to happen, but they don't like inconvenience, traffic jams, lack of inflation, things like that bother the middle class. So cleaning up Kolkata was a very smart agenda item by Trinamool, because you win the middle class over. You make the people say, oh, the city is looking nice again. It's a trivial thing. Okay, your inflation may still be there, but you won sections of the middle class by doing things like that. And that's a good lesson for the left. We need to, not to win the middle class, but we need to make people's lives better, more convenient, cutting red tape down. And I think our policy of panchayat decentralization was part of that. It went really well. I remember visiting a panchayat in Diamond Harbour district, in the south of Bengal, toward the Sundarban area. And in Diamond Harbour district, I was at a panchayat office interviewing some of the panchayat elected officials. And this woman came in. She was a very poor background. She had a very ordinary sari and so on. She walked into the panchayat office, Debashish, and she started yelling at the head punch there, the head of the panchayat, yelling at him, telling him, I told you to do this, you didn't do this, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, okay, we'll do so, whatever. And she left. My thinking was, this is democratizing society. The very fact that a woman like that. So for that woman, this policy was a great policy, But what the Trinamool and others did is they do convenience for the middle class. We try to democratize for the working class and the peasantry. Unfortunately for us, because we don't have a control over the media and so on, our gains get minimized. So what happens is, by the 2000s, people used to say the left front is inefficient. The left front has a city that is falling apart, Calcutta. But the same journalists writing those stories or doing a TV story, they were not going to some village or small town. Diamond Harbour is not a small town, but Diamond Harbour, they were not going to interior northern Bengal, the mid part of Bengal, Chandanagar, all those areas. They were not going there to see actually how the panchayat decentralization was democratizing life. So what happens is, this woman goes into a panchayat office, yells at the punch, comes out, feels good, then goes home, puts the TV on, and what the TV presenter says is that the left front government is inefficient. They are not doing a story saying, wow, they've democratized society so that even a working class woman can go into a panchayat office and yell at a sarpanch or whatever, right? So she is experiencing something. She's experiencing the democratization of life in in outside of Calcutta. But the Calcutta media was running story after story saying the left front government is inefficient. It's inefficient for the middle class, but it wasn't inefficient for the working class and peasantry. But the middle class dominates the journalism. So they create the grand narrative, which made people start saying the left front government is inefficient. We have to learn that lesson. That is why you doing these lives and other shows, very important. We have to bang on our narrative, our own story. Because
এখানে
I don't agree with people who say that, oh, the left was inefficient. I don't agree with that because it's a class question. When you say the left is inefficient, it's a class question. Inefficient for whom? Yes, I agree. Yes, to go to the bureaucracy in Calcutta is a big pain. Okay, you want to go get some electricity bill paid, it's a big pain. You have to wait in line. The middle class found that inefficient. But in rural Bengal, the peasantry had a kind of democracy growing. But we, at the time, lost the communication battle, the battle of narratives. And today, because we are feeling weak, we are giving up fighting for the past. What I'm saying is we have to learn two things. One, defend the gains of that, left front, because there were gains, and at the same time, learn how to create a narrative today, a grand narrative of the left today.
এখানে একটা প্রশ্ন থেকে যায়, দেখবেন যে বাম লেফট ফ্রন্টের কেরালা মডেল সব দিক দিয়ে খুব সার্থক মডেল ভারতীয় প্রেক্ষিতে। আমি বলছি না দুর্নীতি নেই, এমন ব্যাপারটা নয়, কিন্তু সেখানে ওয়েজেস আর্নারদের আয় অনেক বেশি। সেখানে কোভিডের সময় অদ্ভুতভাবে পিনরাই বিজয়ন শ্রমিকের বাড়িতেও বই পাঠিয়েছিলেন। উল্টে আমরা দেখি গুজরাট মডেলে সেই অর্থে কিন্তু গরিব মজদুরদের আয় সেভাবে নেই, সোশ্যাল ডেভেলপমেন্ট ইন্ডেক্সও নেই। আদেও কি লেফট ফ্রন্ট তার গুজরাট বনাম কেরালা মডেলের ফাইটটাকে জনগণের সামনে তুলে ধরছে?
Okay, firstly, Kerala is a unique place. Okay, it's very unique. Why? 100 years of genuine social reform. Bengal has a great tradition of social reform, right? We can go back, to whatever, Vidyasagar. I mean, wherever you go in the past, it has a great. But in Kerala, the social reform movement was more radical. So, for instance, it directly confronted the issue of caste. Directly. It didn't play around with it. It was much more radical. Today, because of that social reform history, and because of the left front powerful movement to democratize society, even the Congress, the Congress in Kerala, in any other state, would be like a communist party. If the Congress party of Kerala was removed from Kerala and put in Gujarat, they would be so far to the left of the Congress party of Gujarat. Because Kerala, all politics has been pushed to the left by the social reform movement and the consistency of left struggle. In Bengal, just to reflect, and I'll say something which I'll regret saying, but in Bengal, left was in power for 34 years. If the left had not been in power for 34 years continuously, but had been in power for 10 years and then allowed the Congress to return and built new mass struggles and pulled society to the left, Bengal could have been like Kerala. Gujarat is a completely different story. Because in Gujarat, even before the BJP, when the Congress was there, before the BJP, Gujarat has never really had a proper social reform movement. There was no frontal attack on caste. There's irony. It's the birthplace of Gandhi, but it's also the home of Sardar Patel, who represented the right wing of the Congress. So, Debashish, when you look at something like Kerala versus Gujarat, the two models, right? And you can compare. You have to also compare the fact that Gujarat has never really had that kind of social transformation that is necessary. You can't build a politics on top of a bad society. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, the great Ambedkar, said that one reason why communism will be hard to build in India, and he was right. He said because of the caste system. He said the caste system creates a society that accepts the permanence of hierarchy. That hierarchy is permanent. So if you can't build communism on top of a caste system. You have to destroy the caste system to build communism. And I agree with Baba Saheb. I agree with him 100%.
আজকে তো তাই জন্য স্লোগানটা উঠে এসেছে, জয় ভীম কমরেড। আজকে তো এই স্লোগানটা জয় ভীম কমরেড।
But comrade, Joy Bhim Comrade is a new thing. It's only about 10, 15, 20 years old. Joy Beam Comrade didn't start in the 1950s. It should have. That's
Should
part
have.
of what I feel. It should have. We should have made a tighter alliance with the
Exactly.
movement to transform society. You know what? In the left, there's a debate, comrade, between the left must operate in the state. The left has to operate against state power and so on. And the argument that the left at the same time must operate to transform society. I am one of those who believes that the transformation of society is as, if not more important than capturing state power. Because when you capture state power on top of a society that's fundamentally unequal, then it's hard to actually move a agenda because society will work against you. And in a
Exactly.
sense, in a place like Bengal, we were not able to transform society fully. Society remained in the grip of all kinds of feudal antagonisms, that were there, present and clear.
আছে, আমাদের একটা পেজ পুরো মানে হ্যাক হয়ে যায়, কথামুখ বলে আমাদের একটা ফেসবুক পেজ অনেকেরই হ্যাক হয়েছে, যারা একটু অন্য ধরনের কথা বলতে চায়। এবং মননের মধ্যে এটা আরো বেশি আছে যে আমার সোশ্যাল বিহেভিয়ার এর মধ্যে, যে বিজয় প্রসাদ যদি কোনো একটা ভালো লেখেন আমি সেটা করবো, কিন্তু আমার কোনো পাড়ার কমরেড যদি কিছু একটা ভালো লেখেন সেটাকে আমি ছাপতেই দেবো না। এই প্রবলেম এই প্রবলেমটা তো আছে। আমরা এখান থেকে একটা জায়গায় যাবো। আমার আজকের আলোচনাটা শেষ করবো। দুজন তাত্ত্বিককে আমার ইমেন্স রেসপেক্ট দিই। একজন হচ্ছে প্রভাত পাট্টানায়ক, আরেকজন হচ্ছেন ইজাজ আহমেদ। ইজাজ আহমেদ একটা নতুন থিওরির কথা বলেছেন যে সংসদীয় গণতন্ত্রকে বজায় রেখেই ফ্যাসিজমের নতুন যে ডেভেলপমেন্ট, সে ফ্যাসিস্ট রাষ্ট্র গড়ে তুলতে পারে। এ বিষয়ে আপনি যদি একটু আলোকপাত করেন, এটা কি সম্ভব যে সংসদীয় গণতন্ত্রকে বজায় রেখে ফ্যাসিজম তার কাজটা সেরে যাবে?
Boss, I'm going to have to leave you soon, but I want to say you raised the name of Aijazahmad. Aijazahmad was my great friend. I spent most of my life learning alongside him, being told by him, what's a good approach and what's not a good approach. He was a genuine Marxist because Ejaz understood that to be a Marxist, you have to be interested in everything.
এক্সাক্টলি,
You have to be interested in everything. What's going on television, what's happening in the factory.
এক্সাক্টলি।
Marxism is a study and praxis of the whole.
হ্যাঁ, কার্ল মার্কস এই কথাই বলে, নিহিল, মানবিক সবকিছুই আমার আত্মীয়। নিহিল, the
Exactly.
concept of
And that's the title of the book I did with Ejaz, right? But here's the interesting thing is Marx used the term praxis in his writings. Praxis, a very important concept. Praxis doesn't mean, doing things, theory and practice. Praxis is not a synonym for practice.
এক্সাক্টলি,
Praxis is different. Praxis is creative, self-conscious activity. But creative, self-conscious activity. Humans are extremely active. We can't, well, we may take a nap to rest and refresh ourselves, but we're active people. We always want to do something, we would like to do something. Creative, self-conscious activity is praxis. And Marx's entire sensibility was that we want to create a socialism where people can live by being creative and self-conscious about their activity. Today, it's very hard to imagine that creativity is what motivates what people are doing, and self-consciousness. There are a lot of times we do things without thinking, without reflecting, no time to think and reflect. So, socialism is a great dream. Socialism is for us the ultimate ambition. We want to live in a world where people are able to be creative and self-conscious in their activity. Everything we're doing now is building toward that. It's wrong to say, hey, look, 34 years in left front government in Bengal, you built socialism. No, nobody was building socialism. We are in the prehistory toward building something like socialism. We were struggling to build democracy. Right now in a place like India, the left's real agenda is to build a people's democracy, a genuine democracy, not some electoral democracy which is about money and media, but a place where a woman in Diamond Harbor district can walk into an office and tell a elected official, why aren't you doing your job? That's a people's democracy. That's what we're trying to build right now. It's very difficult to imagine socialism completely today because it's impossible with the way in which culture has been corrupted to think of creative self-conscious activity being the main form of human life. With From Ejaz, I learned this in many debates about socialism isn't state policy. The great test of socialism is when you are surrounded by creative
Exactly.
self-conscious activity. People are happy with each other.
খুব খুব সাধারণ জায়গাটা বললেন, সেটা কি সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়নে স্ট্যালিন এরাতে বিভিন্নভাবে আক্রান্ত হয়েছিল যখন ট্রটস্কিকে পার্টি থেকে তাড়িয়ে দেওয়া হয় বা তাকে খুন করা হয়? কারণ ট্রটস্কি তো অসাধারণ লেখক ছিলেন, তার মতামতের সব জায়গার সাথে আমি একমত নই, কিন্তু এই ক্রিয়েটিভ যে সেলফ কনসিয়াস অ্যাক্টিভিটি তার উপর তো ট্রটস্কির জীবনটাও দাঁড়িয়েছিল। এটা যদি আলোকপাত করেন।
It's the last thing I'm going to say because I have to leave you. But you see, it's interesting. People can go back and study. In fact, I am rereading Lenin's last 4 or 5 texts before he died. His last important text is called Better, Fewer, but Better, about quality of socialist work. It's a fantastic text. I'm thinking of, in fact, collecting the last 4 texts of Lenin and doing a little book about them, writing a long essay to explain them. Trotsky was an interesting man. Trotsky was very bright. He was a good writer. He was an immensely cultured man, came from an intellectual background. It's very unfair to compare Trotsky to Stalin. Stalin's mother was a domestic worker. Stalin came from the very poorest of people. Stalin came from a class background which had great hatred for the bourgeoisie. Stalin's motivation was great hatred for the bourgeoisie because he had seen the immense disrespect visited upon his mother, his family members, himself. He didn't come from an intellectual background. Stalin couldn't quote poetry like this because he didn't come from that background. Stalin came from the background of a worker. Trotsky comes from the background surrounded by books. He has the quotations ready and so on. Lenin was very much interested in how these personalities were different. They represented the 2 class fractions of socialism. Trotsky coming from the upper levels of the petty bourgeoisie, intellectual families and so on. And Stalin coming from the most wretched section of the rural working class. And so, when we look at the 2 of them, Stalin and Trotsky, it's really it's I think wrong to look at their writings and compare them because they wrote at different levels. But more than anything, again with Stalin, too much is placed on his head, as if Stalin did all these bad things. Stalin was the leader of a process, and that process was building socialism in a very adverse situation.
Socialism in one country, brother. Socialism in one country.
But also, they were under attack and so on. But the main thing is, I've always found in 1987, B.T. Ranadev, the leader of the CPIM, published a terrific essay in the Marxist, the journal of the CPIM, theoretical journal, where he assessed the Soviet Union, 70 years of the Soviet Union. And what BTR said in this essay is very useful. He said that, look, the problem with this period, you see, Trotsky is not relevant because Trotsky, you should see Lenin writing about Trotsky's mistakes. Like Trotsky, for instance, wanted to bring the trade union movement into the state. And Lenin said, are you crazy? Trade unions must be independent of the state. You should not incorporate all these aspects. So it's not like Trotsky was like some genius of building socialism. He was a good writer. That's what he was. But in this essay, BTR says that the problem in the Soviet Union was they violated their own constitution. That they had a great constitution, the 1925 constitution and so on, but they violated them. So that, for instance, the attack on the opposition that took place in the 1930s, late 20s and 30s, attack on the opposition was conducted against the constitution. They should have followed the constitution. that the Soviet constitution. It's a good constitution. They violated their own constitution. And that, I think, is a better critique of that period of the Soviet Union than saying, let's blame Stalin, and Stalin was paranoid. Because there's also, interestingly, amongst socialist intellectuals, a class bias. They are class biased towards Trotsky because Trotsky is more like them. Trotsky can write about literature, poetry, and so on. They are class biased for him. They are class biased against Stalin. Stalin was the child of a rural, poor family. When intellectuals assess the Soviet Union, the bias against Stalin is very great. I just want to put that on the table, Debashish, that people who write about the past also have their own class affinities and bias. No doubt about it. When you read Trotsky, his writing is beautiful. When you read Stalin, his writing is much more wooden. But you have to understand where they're coming from. It's less the style that one uses to assess them and their place in history. Stalin has a very important place in history. Now, I understand people are embarrassed by that because they say, well, he was a butcher, murderer, whatever. But I think go back and read BTR's assessment. It's not Stalin that was there. It's, in fact, a problem in socialist, or in this case, Soviet legality. They didn't follow the laws. In the same way, in Germany, it's not Hitler that does everything bad. It's the deep roots of German ethno-nationalism, cultural nationalism, anti-Semitism. That's what leads to the Holocaust, not Hitler's personality. It's not a one person doing something. But I have to leave you. So that's also an issue.
থ্যাংক ইউ। তাহলে মোটামুটি আমাদের বন্ধুদের কিছু বলবেন, কথামুখের বন্ধুদের একটা মেসেজ কি কোনো কিছু দেবেন?
Listen, firstly, I would say to people, study, struggle, build a project in Bengal again. I was there during the CAA protests, mass protests in Bengal, people dissatisfied, students and so on. Be brave. You're going to face a lot of fight back. They are not willing to let us build our project, but you got to do it. You got important tasks ahead of you, but the old SFI slogan is the best slogan, Debashish: study and struggle.
নিশ্চয়ই। ফলে এক আকাশ কবিতার সামনে আমরা দাঁড়ালাম, কেউ কথা রাখেনি, কেউ কথা রাখে না নয়, বিজয় প্রসাদের মতো ব্যক্তিত্বরা বারবার কথা রাখার চেষ্টা করেন। আপনাকে অনন্ত ধন্যবাদ।